August 1947. The British are quitting India nearly 200 years after they took power. One of the largest, most ethnically diverse nations in the world has been divided. One country will now become two, India and Pakistan. As a British barrister draws a line on a map, a once peaceful land implodes. People are forced out of the villages they have lived in for generations. 15 million scramble to be on the right side of the new border. At least 1 million die in the process.
And this huge mass of humanity just moving along, barefooted, no food, thirsty. It was a terrible sight, terrible sight.
Communities that have lived together for centuries turn on each other in one of the worst communal massacres of the 20th century.
It was so senseless, so utterly senseless. And yet, there's nothing you can do about it.
Britain, the once great colonial power, looks on as India burns.
Hindus and Muslims were in the grip of madness, you know. Lunacy.
In 1946, British India was largely at peace. On the surface, there was communal harmony between Hindus, Muslims, and Sikhs.
In the same part of the village, I remember Hindus and Sikhs living side by side, you know, living with us, you know. Not far from where I lived, you know. And whenever there was any wedding in the family, I remember the Hindus and the Sikhs bringing sweetmeats, you know, to my father, you know, you see, and offering. And we lived very happily, very happily.
In British India, the 255 million Hindus were in a majority. India's 92 million Muslims were concentrated in the northwest and northeast of the country. The 6 million Sikhs lived mostly in the Punjab, one of the richest and most diverse provinces in India. Lahore was its ancient capital. Lahore was one of the most cosmopolitan cities in the country, a center for education and fashion. Roded Khan, a Muslim, had left his village to study law and history at Lahore's Foreman Christian College.
Lahore took my breath away, you know. It was a different city, you know, and it was a different world. It was a very liberal, very tolerant, very progressive institution.
At the same time, Somanand, a Hindu, was in his final year of school in one of Lahore's fashionable suburbs.
The fashions in Lahore became popular all over Punjab, not only in Punjab but in northern India. There was a famous saying in Punjabi that a person who has not seen Lahore has not been born yet. He is yet to be born.
In a few months' time, the peace of this ancient city would be shattered. For nearly 200 years, Britain ruled over India's 380 million people. India was the centerpiece of Britain's empire, a source of money and power. For the British who were stationed there, life had changed little in decades. John Moores, an officer to a Gurkha regiment, had been in India for a year.
We had a hunt, and they'd imported these hounds possibly in the 20s or somewhere like that, and they used to hunt jackal. The tribesmen would come in with a live jackal and release them eventually, and then the hunt would take it up and try chasing them. But then you had to have a whole brigade out defending the hunters. They would be deployed all round over 70 miles.
For decades, Indians had fought to rid themselves of British rule. The independence movement had been kept in check by ruthless military force. But by 1946, everything had changed. World War II had left Britain bankrupt. Mr. Moores and the other British troops knew that they would be the last.
We knew that having come through a very expensive world war, that the cost of maintaining an army in India following the Far East War, we realized that this couldn't be paid for. The taxpayer, England was in a bad state, particularly 46, 47, financially.
But India's independence leaders were divided over what should happen when Britain left. The Indian National Congress, under its leaders Pandit Nehru and Mahatma Gandhi, demanded a single state where all religions would live side by side. But many Muslims feared living under a Hindu majority. Even in the middle-class homes of Lahore, ancient prejudices ran deep.
At one level, they had very cordial relations. Our Muslim neighbors were very good. They helped us, we helped them. But see, Hindus had a curious inhibitions. My mother's attitude, she didn't allow any Muslim to enter her kitchen. Any cooked thing from a Muslim home was not allowed to enter the kitchen. When she was eating, she would not allow her Muslim neighbors, lady, to touch her. So such inhibitions and customs, they kept us apart.
In Lahore's old city, Muslims were forbidden from drinking from the same taps as Hindus. Zahur Uddin, a Muslim, was a champion wrestler from the old city.
बाकी असी लोग जाके लगले जांदे पानी पींदे सा ना वो छबील तो पानी गिलास ही कुछ सानी हन पियांदे वो ऐसा पानी भी नहीं सन पियांदे उन्होंने एक एडी एडी लम्मी नौजल रखी सी लोहे दी वो इत्थों फड़दे सन ते जिथे तुसीं बैठे हो ना उत्थों तक नौजल होंदी सी इत्थों पानी पांदा सी ते असीं ऐसा पानी पींदे सा वो छूत तो भी सानू छूत समझदा सी हिंदू.
The Muslims were not getting enough jobs, education, they were not so education. They envied Hindus who had the best of jobs, and they always wanted. That's why the slogan of a Muslim homeland became very popular among the Muslims.
Muslim fears that Hindus would dominate an independent India drove the demand for a separate Muslim homeland. It was championed principally by one man, a 70-year-old British-educated barrister, Muhammad Ali Jinnah. His Muslim League demanded the division of India into two, one country for the Hindus and Sikhs and another for the Muslims.
Once the British leave, and there will be a democratic form of government, you see, But in a democratic form of government, the Hindus will always be in a majority, and the Muslim will always be in a minority. We have no chance. Our minority will never be transformed into a majority, and the Hindu majority will always remain a permanent majority. Therefore, we have no chance.
Pandit Nehru, the leader of Congress, toured the country arguing the case for a united India.
The whole idea that India should be divided was based on a fantastic notion that religion constitutes nationality.
Nayantara Sehgal lived with her uncle, Pandit Nehru.
While I was growing up, the entire national movement, which had cut across religion, region, caste, class, sex, it had been a truly unifying experience. So for a person like me, it was an absurd idea that India should be divided. It made no sense of any kind.
Clouds gather over Simla for the opening of Lord Wavell's conference with the Indian leaders.
In March 1946, a British government delegation, the Cabinet Mission, arrived to negotiate between Congress and the League. This was supposed to be the breakthrough conference, where a deal would be struck leading to an independent India.
Pandit Nehru, who calls for an Indian republic, is accused by the League of working for domination over the Muslim minority.
Jinnah did compromise on his demand for a separate Muslim state. He accepted a united India if it had weak central powers. But Nehru, a socialist and believer in a strong central state, refused any such concessions to the Muslim League.
Mr. Jinnah, the Muslim leader, holds fast to Pakistan, and it's reported that his maximum concessions were regarded by Congress as inadequate. At any rate, the fateful conference at Simla, following the preliminary work in Delhi, has ended in failure.
Calcutta, a stronghold of the Muslim League, August the 16th, 1946. With the collapse of negotiations, Jinnah called for direct action. Thousands of Muslims gathered in the center of the city to demand a separate homeland, Pakistan. As the crowds dispersed, the more radical elements headed for the Hindu parts of the city.
I was thinking of going out for a stroll, and then all of a sudden I found some Muslim hoodlums. They came out, shouted, Nara-e-Takbir, Allahu Akbar. Allah is the great master.
Local gangsters hijacked the demonstration. They whipped up the mob, and it turned violent.
Then I found that a neighbor who had come out to see what was happening, his head was cracked and lay bleeding. So I thought that going out would be absolutely foolhardy. Then these boys, they started hitting the doors, and they said that we will not spare any Hindu.
As the city erupted in communal violence, Muslim slaughter of Hindus turned to Hindu slaughter of Muslims. Shankar Ghosh, was covering the riots for a Calcutta newspaper.
A jewellery shop was surrounded by a crowd armed with iron rods. An elderly employee, he was already half dead in fear. He came with his folded hands like this. But this furious mob, they had no time to hear what he wanted to say. So I think a boy of 14 or 15 just pulled his leg as he came out, and the man fell down, and someone hit him on the head with an iron rod. I think that one blow had finished him.
Around 5,000 people were killed in 3 days of rioting. But the British, with one eye on leaving India and fearful of being overrun, ordered the troops to stay in their barracks until it was too late.
We had absolute faith in British authority. We had absolute faith in the peace that British had given us. For 3 days there was no sign of authority on the streets, and it was anybody could murder anybody.
The Calcutta killings shattered the hope of the British that they could get out of India quietly and peacefully. With religious hatred and suspicion growing, the dream of a united India seemed to be falling apart. Pran Chopra was a young reporter for All India Radio at the time of the riots.
Until then, there was still a possibility that there could be an undivided India. That impression evaporated in the heat of what came to be known as the Great Calcutta Killings. Once that impact spread through the rest of the country, the hope that India could remain undivided began to vanish.
After Calcutta, the violence spread. In Bihar, Hindus largely massacred Muslims. In Noakhali, in Bengal, it was Hindus who were mostly under attack. With British power waning, India was in danger of falling apart in the chaos of communal violence. One man thought he could bring the country together and maintain the dream of a united India: Mahatma Gandhi. Ashoka Gupta was one of Gandhi's disciples.
After the riots, Gandhiji's attitude was that we are same people, born in the same country, brought up in the same country. We have believed in the community living. Whether you follow this faith or that faith, it doesn't matter. It's the humanity which concerns.
Gandhi spent the first months of 1947 walking through the villages of Noakhali, holding prayer meetings, trying to bring Hindus and Muslims together. Ashoka Gupta went with him.
Gandhi walked from one village to another, and while he walked, he sang. He rested in a Muslim house, then he rested in a Hindu house.
But the great pacifist and campaigner for independence was hardly the unifying figure he wanted to be.
Gradually, the prayer meetings, the non-Hindus were absent.
Shankar Ghosh reported the story for his Calcutta newspaper.
The Muslims were not keen to come to him, were not keen to listen to him. And before Gandhiji went on his morning trip from one village to another, they used to defy the path, spread thorns, bones, etc. on this road. An advance party had to be sent because he was in Noakhali, he was not wearing any shoes. He was walking barefoot.
Gandhi had always opposed constitutional concessions to Muslims. For many of them, he represented Hindu supremacy.
Mr. Gandhi did not appeal to the Muslims, He failed to win the hearts and minds of the Muslims of India, The way he used to talk about politics and his language, it was foreign. It did not appeal to Muslims at all, But he used to be practically, naked. He used to have one arm on the shoulder of one girl, and he should have another arm on the shoulder of another. And the Hindus thought he was a saint,
Gandhi's dream of a united India seemed to be collapsing.
He was a sad man. I think nobody was listening to him. He was considered to be an incorrigible idealist who has no connection with reality.
In February 1947, the British government made a dramatic declaration. They would definitely leave India by June 1948. But there was still no agreement on how to give India to the Indians. With chaos spreading, they decided on a radical solution: to appoint a new viceroy.
The scene is North Holt Airfield, the occasion the departure of Lord Mountbatten of Burma, who was leaving for India with his wife. Before the new viceroy, there lay the task of holding office for the brief but obviously difficult period of just over a year until the date when Indians are to take full control of India. Everyone in Britain, I'm certain, wishes the viceroy all possible success in India.
I was in school, and they said, you'll miss the last term of school, and we're taking you out in the middle of this term because Daddy's been appointed Viceroy of India, and so we're going out for probably a couple of years. And, thought we'd take you as well, because you can be useful.
In March 1947, Mountbatten arrived in India. The former Supreme Allied Commander of Southeast Asia had a reputation for being a decisive leader, a man who could knock heads together. His brief was simple: to get a deal and get Britain out before India imploded.
The swearing in, of course, was a very great ceremony in the Durbar Hall, and so trumpeters and all the staff in their full dress uniform, my father in full dress uniform, my mother in a long white dress, and I think a sort of laurel wreaths in her hair. And they looked like film stars.
The Viceroy, his wife Edwina the Vicereine, and their daughter Pamela moved into Viceroy's house in New Delhi with its staff of 5,000.
In Viceroy's house, there were indoor gardeners. Now, the indoor gardeners just arranged the flowers in the vases and changed the water. And there were 25 of them as indoor gardeners. There was one man who spent his entire time with a seal that bore the British crown, stamping the butter pads. And there was another unfortunate man known as the chicken plucker, who did nothing else. So the scale was so amazing.
Narendra Singh Sarila was to become Mountbatten's aide-de-camp, his personal assistant. Among other things, his job was to assist on tiger hunts.
Lord Mountbatten was a very articulate man, and he used to plan ahead what he's going to do. And he used to carry it through ruthlessly.
Despite the formalities of life at Viceroy's house, Mountbatten seemed like a new breed of Viceroy.
First of all, his background helped him, because everybody knew that he was cousin of the king. But still, he acted without any airs. And I think that impressed Indians, because other viceroys kept, their sort of upper lip and that sort of thing. And I think that helped to impress people.
Well, the first thing that was different with my father and mother was that when they were entertaining, I mean, they were in India, they invited Indians, which had never happened before. I mean, yes, of course, Indian princes were entertained, but the ordinary Indian ministers and lawyers and doctors or whoever had never been invited, so that was quite a new thing.
On the personal level, Dickie was a very charming, very handsome, very lovable person who met one very informally, and when one was very young and rather nervous in front of important people, he could put one at one's ease. He was awfully sweet.
Mountbatten's first task was to meet the Indian leaders, Mahatma Gandhi and Pandit Nehru for Congress, and Muhammad Ali Jinnah for the Muslim League. He hoped his more informal style would give him greater success than his stuffier predecessors.
They sat away from the desks in armchairs and were offered refreshments of some kind, and he would say, well, now, before you put me in the picture politically and in the state of India, do tell me a bit about yourself.
It was a technique that worked with Nehru. The two would become lifelong friends, but it totally failed with Jinnah.
He came out of the meeting afterwards and said to his aides, my goodness, he was cold, cold as ice.
I vividly recall everything graphically. The refugees wanted to kill him. He was shocked. A man who grew up as the darling of the people was going to be killed by the same people. I had been in pro-Nehru fellow, but that evening I did not feel, because I thought for the leaders having been truly responsible for all this havoc. So I thought he was only harvesting what he had sowed. So that first time that day, I felt no reverence toward him.
In Lahore, there were now few Hindus left. Somanand and his father were among the last. In the weeks following partition, they came under attack from Muslim gangs seeking a religiously pure Lahore.
And it was free for all in the city. There was no one to check them. So they had come for that purpose, and somebody had given them our address and all that, and they came to kill us. But fortunately, we had a very narrow escape. And I was with a neighbor, with a Muslim neighbor, and they looted, they ransacked the house, took away all the clothes which they could use, all our shoes. And when our Muslim neighbor raised a hue and cry, they said, we'll shoot you if you support the Kafirs.
It was too much even for Som and his father, who throughout the violence had held out the hope that they could stay on in the city of their birth.
Then we decided to go to Delhi straight away. Went to the airport and came to Delhi with our two clothes, no nothing. We left in a plane. My father bought 2 tickets for Delhi. I saw our houses when the plane went up and flied over model town. I wept.
In Dillon's village, where the Muslims had been protected by his grandfather, the Indian army arrived one day and ordered the Muslims out.
It was a sort of very heavy moment. There were tearful departures and farewells. The Muslims left most of their assets and properties with their neighbors, thinking that they would be able to come again to pick those things up. Initially, the people felt very remorse about their going. But then, in a couple of days, sort of they try to occupy their homes. They try to take away whatever they had left.
In only a few months, India had been divided along religious lines. The Indian part of the Punjab was cleared of nearly all its Muslims, while Pakistan was emptied of most of its Sikhs and Hindus. Lahore, once one of the most mixed cities in all of India, was now home only to Muslims.
Gone was the cosmopolitan Lahore, you see. Gone was liberal, tolerant, progressive Lahore, you see. But I think culturally, Lahore suffered, you see. It was a great city in those days. It was a great city in those days. With the passage of time, we became more conservative, more backward, more intolerant, more pseudo-Islamic, you know. Pseudo-Islamic, you see.
I think the primary responsibility is of the Hindus who didn't treat the Muslims as their equals. That was the root cause. The Muslims and Hindus couldn't integrate despite living together for all these centuries.
With the partition over, the job was done for the few British troops still left in India. John Moores returned to Britain at the end of 1947.
I think the worst thing was that we couldn't stop the violence. The unnecessary cruelty is something which we didn't really know much about.
Mountbatten stayed on in India until the end of 1948 as its Governor-General. He returned to his career in the Navy, becoming First Sea Lord. He was killed by an IRA bomb in 1979.
The whole problem was that Mountbatten tried to do this job in too short a time. To expect a country to be partitioned, a new country to be created, and within 2 months move the portion of the government of India to Pakistan, and to move the troops to Pakistan and from Pakistan to India was a tremendous job. It cannot be done, and that's exactly what happened. Everything went out of control.
Satish Gujral, the art student from Lahore, became one of India's greatest painters.
This experience sank in me so deep after partition, and began to paint without any consciously effort. This woman suffering, this brutality of man to man became my theme.
The border created in 1947 would become the focus for 3 wars and 60 years of animosity between the government of India and Pakistan. But for the people of the two countries, it was the tragedy of separation that lingered on.
I missed my friends. I couldn't understand why they had to go. Why were they pushed away? The only thing was that they were being pushed away. I knew they were not going happily, so I couldn't understand why. And I still think, why? What did anybody get out of it?
And on BBC 4 at 11 in Midnight's Grandchildren, 3 British teenagers travelled to the Punjab to see how their families were affected by partition. Coming next here on BBC 2, Newsnight.
What's it really like to be British and Asian today? How has the independence of 60 years ago affected your life? Have your say. Asian Nation continues today on the BBC Asian Network.